I'll start. Here we go. Hey, everybody. I just want to talk a little bit about, because people ask, like, what makes you get into NLP and all this other stuff, and because I got into the NLP and the hypnosis before I went back to get psychological training, um, because the NLP and the hypnosis works. And, sometimes we think it's something deep or that, and the difference is, of course, I always think when someone studies psychology, they say they want to become a psychologist. I always kid around with people because they'll say, "Oh, my son or my daughter or myself, they think about taking psychology." I'll say, "Well, it lets me know one of two things. Either they think there's something wrong with them, and they think by taking these classes it will fix me or someone in my family, right? Or I want to learn how to really mess with people. So I want to learn psychology. I want to learn to mess with people, right?" And people look, but it's true. I mean, there was read an article from the APA that kind of said this is why people start psychology. Of course, if you've ever studied psychology, in a university, they don't teach you anything until like your graduate, postgrad, really in your doctorate program, you begin to really learn. But all the beginning is just history, and it's not very useful. But what made me fall in love with NLP and hypnosis was I saw it work. Saw it work with people. I had to do with an addiction. I was doing some stuff around an addiction treatment center, and two things happened about the same time. One is there was a guy that worked at this addiction treatment center. It was more of a detox back then. It was like it was 40 years ago, and where they had these detox all over America. And so the guy that worked there, he'd been sober for a long time, quit drinking and maybe other drugs, I don't remember, but I knew he was a big drinker. And he quit drinking, but he chain smoked cigarettes. And this is back like early 80s, right? And when you could smoke anywhere, depending on your age, you remember when people could smoke. And I'm not exaggerating when I said he smoked 3 packs a day, right? I mean, he'd have a cigarette in one room, then a cigarette in another room. It was crazy. Anyway, he goes to a stop smoking seminar at here in the States, like at a hotel, a Holiday Inn, and whatever. They used to have them all over America. We used to call them the Holiday Inn circuit, where you go do stop smoking and weight loss. I did them years later. But anyway, he goes to this stop smoking thing because he wanted to stop smoking. And he comes back to the treatment center, which is high stress. You got people trying to detox and all this other stuff. And he wasn't smoking. He just wasn't smoking. And he wasn't crazy. He wasn't bitching. He wasn't angry. And he wasn't eating himself like people do sometimes think with smoking. I thought, this is fascinating. Why don't we use this for what we're doing here with the alcohol and the drugs? And of course, he's like, I don't know, and no one could answer the question. So I asked, the clinical director. I was just doing some volunteer work then at the time. And he said, at least he was honest. He goes, I don't know. It's just like, there's not a lot of research at the time or things like that, whatever he said. Anyway, we had a consulting psychologist and a consulting psychiatrist. And the psychologist did the typical, well, the empirical research isn't really whatever, right? Which was kind of interesting. Well, the psychiatrist, I remember asking him, and he went, well, I don't know much about hypnosis. All I know is that if it really worked, I would know it. And I go, well, that's interesting. He's a young guy, kind of an arrogant psychiatrist. Because I always tell the joke, he thought MD stood for minor deity. He had nothing left, especially from anybody underneath him. He had nothing to learn. I said, well, Doc, how would you know it if you didn't learn it? I would just know it. Basically, defaulting, I would learn it in medical school. I'm like, oh, I don't know, right? But this guy, I just saw him and he didn't start smoking again. And I thought it was fascinating. So I went to where the guy was teaching or doing another one of those stop smoking seminars a couple of towns over. And I introduced myself and I said, you know, someone I know came here to stop smoking. And he goes, oh, okay. He was a friendly guy. He's a Southern guy from America. And he goes, oh, do you need to quit smoking? I said, no, I don't smoke. He goes, I told him what I did. He goes, well, just sit in on the seminar. He's very friendly. He goes, just sit in, tell me what you think. So I sat in and I thought it was fascinating. He did what he did. And afterwards I said, oh, this is really cool. Where'd you learn it? And I still remember this. He went, I read a book. I go, what do you mean? He goes, well, he was a high school teacher. Michelle might, could remember. And he was a basketball coach. He's a big guy, played basketball. And he was always looking for ways to help his athletes. And he read a book on hypnosis to motivate athletes. And because people had found out he was helping people, with that, they started asking, can you help me stop smoking? Can you do this? So he started doing that. And he goes, well, I started thinking I was helping all these people quit smoking at like whatever it was, $20, one-on-one. Why don't I put it? Then he got a group of people together, usually teachers, because groups are small. And he goes, next thing you know, he goes, I just decided to start doing it, and this is back he's been doing this since the 60s. He literally made millions and millions of dollars. I'm not exaggerating. And I'm like, I'm like, really? He goes, yeah, I read a book and just started practicing. Right. So he told me the name of the book. I went and found it and read it and started, remind me of a book I read in high school in hypnosis. So it started it off. Anyway, the way I fell in love with NLP was when NLP was first taking off. And I was looking for some like hypnosis training. You couldn't find it. Remember, this is pre-internet. You had to like look in the phone book. It was weird trying to find information. Those of us that remember that. Go to the library. It was like, it was savage, ladies and gentlemen. It was archaic. It was prehistoric. But it was interesting. There was a little ad in a like local thing like a metaphysical newspaper in Chicago. And it had to do with an NLP workshop. And I thought, well, this is interesting. Just kind of, I didn't know what NLP was. It just sounded cool. And so I read it and it said like, so I went to this workshop and the guy explained that it was basically waking hypnosis and then it worked on, helping people make changes rapidly. It's not that complicated. And it was kind of interesting because he was a psychologist and I was starting to study psychology. And he said, he fell in love with this because it worked faster than clinical psych. So anyway, I was thinking of this the other day. This is all opening and closing loops for my hypnotists, trainers, right? And this story came to me the other day when I was on a movie set, believe it or not, because they had all these snacks laid out, and I didn't want to start eating crap while I was on this movie set. And they had a bag of apples, little bags of nice fresh apples, right? So I was sitting there and I started eating an apple. I ate several apples over the couple of days I was there, right? And one of the people there that was in this movie that was helping set it up goes, yeah, you eat that. And I go, well, I love fruit. And it's healthy, keeps me from eating all the junk because they had the chips and the candies and all the stuff that they put out on it's called craft in the film industry. I said, I don't want to start eating that stuff. They go, oh, okay. But in the back of my mind, I was thinking, this is the thing. Eating that apple was the thing that got me hooked on NLP. And that story is I was at this seminar and the person was talking about NLP and how it works and all this stuff. And he goes, well, let me go do a demo because demos are always more effective than trying to explain it, especially to a group of people that were a lot of social workers. He goes, does anyone here have either something they need to quit, like eating, but they're having some difficulties, or maybe there's something they want to start eating that they're not eating? Well, nobody volunteered for the give up of food, which was interesting, but sometimes people do that. But when he said, does anybody need to eat, start eating like, he said like vegetables and salads and stuff. And, I'll eat those. But then he said anything else, I raised my hand. And I go, I really need to eat fruit. I need to eat a lot of fruit. I don't eat much fruit. And I remember somebody in the room went, that's stupid. Fruit's healthy for you and all this. I'm like, I'm an athlete. I'd always been an athlete in high school, went in the military, and did athletic stuff in the military, but lifted weight. I generally eat clean, but I just never ate fruit. And he goes, oh, that's cool. Come on down. There's, we could do that. And he goes, well, what would be a representation of a fruit you won't eat? I said, apples. I won't eat apples. They're disgusting. Remember I said that. And he goes, what do you mean? I go, I just, I'm not going to eat it. He goes, well, close your eyes, describe an apple. I go, well, they're black and gooey, kind of rancid, kind of like what you'd find at the bottom of a barrel. And he goes, where is it? And I point down. He goes, well, this makes sense. If that's how your brain is representing it, black and gooey and, and warm and mushy, yeah, right? He goes, you're not going to eat it. I said, yeah. And he goes, what's good for you? I go, that's irrelevant, because we all know that has nothing to do with really motivating people, right? And so then he goes, well, what would be a food that you eat now? You eat a lot of. It's no big deal to you. You like it, right? And he goes, doesn't matter if it's good for you or not. Because I was going to try to pick something healthy. I go, wow, food I absolutely love. I'll eat all the time, especially if it had no negative consequence, would be Cinnabons, right?
Yeah.
Not cinnamon rolls. In America, they make this god-awful shit called Cinnabons. And he goes, well, describe Cinnabons. I close my eyes. I go, oh, they'd be right here. They're about that big. They're huge. It's white, tannish color with the white cinnamon or cream cheese frosting with cinnamon and that gooey stuff that it has. And it's hot. It's three-dimensional. It's kind of spinning on a plate, and I hear like almost like angelic music in the background, and my inner dialogue is, Now, I don't eat that many Cinnabons. You don't find them like you used to, but I just, I'll eat them. I love them. Right? And so then he said, well, let's try this. Tell your brain it's okay. He goes, now imagine moving that apple from down where it was, where you gooey and black and snotty and bushy, and move it up slowly with your hands to where the Cinnabon was. I said, okay, I can put it there. He goes, now kind of lock it in, and notice the color might change and morph, and I'll do all this other stuff. I said, yeah. And he goes, well, what's some of the change? He goes, well, and I said, well, suddenly it became kind of shiny, right? And it was, for some reason, it felt cool, went to the, well, it's an apple, felt cool to the touch. And I remember I said, well, if I bit into it, I'd hear the crunch. Yeah. And, he goes, okay. And I go, I left it there. And he goes, now open your eyes like that. Very simple technique. And he goes, now what happens when you think of eating an apple? I said, I could eat an apple. I think I'd enjoy it. But again, you don't know. I'm sitting at this seminar in the north side of Chicago. It's like, whatever. And, but a couple of days later, I was somewhere where talking to someone, and I grabbed they had fruit there, and I grabbed an apple and I started eating as I'm talking to, and they were like dumbfounded, right? Because they'd never seen me eat fruit. And I'm like, what do you mean? And then I remember just saying without thinking, I go, what do you mean? I love fruit. And that was the day, I swear to God, I walked over, dug out the phone number, and called and signed up for the NLP training. Because they go, something's working here. I didn't want to overthink it, right? And it's lasted all these years later, right? And so to me, that's why it's one of my go-to default demos. So it would be like, and you could go the other way. You could take a food away and move it down. I didn't want to do that, right? But I've done it for that because that's just how your brain works. It moves things around and it works quite efficiently.